for ease of operations, obviously, you guys had to build a technology product at some point. So how did you go about that?
No, we actually, when you looked at technology, so we actually started by buying technology. So I always say the biggest mistake we did was a $10 million mistake, buying the wrong technology. We were buying a Ferrari to go to mile 12 markets. So it didn't work.
What did you buy?
Well, I mean, we bought a world-class trading platform, market leader in Europe, North America.
Okay.
And we're going to deploy it in Rwanda and then Nigeria afterwards. It just had so much. First, it had so much resource requirements that it was difficult to implement. Second is that the cost of maintenance and cost of updates was exorbitant, that it was going to, kill the business. And third is that it wasn't just mobile. It wasn't mobile friendly, so which is what Africa works with and the world today, to be honest. So I think it was just that thing of where the global market was and what they needed at that time versus where Africa was and what we needed at the time. So we left that. It was the first mistake. We put in 70% of our first capital market, first capital raise on that. Very expensive, very painful, but we plowed forward. So the point where we then got into technology, our build was in 2017, where we had the first commercial scale. So at the time, we had gone from 4, 5 operational warehouses to about 17 operational warehouses. We had, registered a lot more farmers. I think we had crossed that 12,000 farmers at the time. And we then had them come. It was the beginning of the season. Our season starts in October. Farmers harvested, brought the grains to the warehouse. We used to scan, write paper-based receipts, scan it, attach it to an email, send it to the back office in Abuja. They will download all of them, store them in a folder, type them out in an Excel sheet, process them with a letter to the bank, and that was our process. So, and it had worked for 2 years. But this year we had scaled almost 10 times what we did before. I recall that time where we had cash, we had everything, but the volume of transactions that came in the first 4 days of the season, the process we had built could not process it for almost 2 weeks. You couldn't even download all the documents, scanning wasn't working, we were making mistakes with commas and full stops. And that was the point where we had the first breakdown. So we had to go back and say, look, looks like this is not working. What's an alternative? How can we fix things? We lost a big opportunity that year, but then we were able to get someone to the rescue that then helped us build the first, what we call in our days, WorkBench 1.0, which essentially, and WorkBench came from the point that the guys need a WorkBench type tool to literally convert data and send it to Abuja. And that was all it did. So we did that. We had a lot of challenges. We had to vendor management issues around software development, scope creep, and all of those things. Then 2018, we said, look, it made sense for us to start to build something. Again, when you want to start with technology, the natural mistake is to overdo it. So we tried overdoing it at the time. Built a team of consultants that would design it. We over-designed.
Who were the users to start with? So you mentioned
we had there was no agile, there was no product.
I understand that, but regardless of
if I speak from where we were at the time in 2018, we had in 2017 we had a problem. We needed data to move from the warehouse, 17 warehouses, into one point in Abuja, and from that one point we could find a way to get into the bank.
What kind of data was this?
This was transactions. So the name, the bank account number, the volume, the price, the quantity, the price, and then the value, the fees, and then the value in the XP. That was it. Now, the guy writing the paper, he had made a mistake. The person typing it in an Excel sheet may be the one to make the
data entry was a major issue.
Yeah, so, we then had to then come back to the same problem and figure out how we could do better. So one of the things we figured out was we could have a better system that we had pre-registered the farmers before then. So when we were just time for transaction, we were only just pulling out their records. So we needed a CRM. We also figured out that we had inventory problems. So when we buy from a farmer, we had to also track that inventory and be able to know where it is and what it is. When we gave a loan to a farmer, we needed to be able to know how much it was owing every point in time, and when it's time for repayment, be able to clear it. So we needed an ARP. So we then scoped out a new version of WorkBench, which we first tried to build a team together to build. We had overscoped it, so it didn't work. And we had to pull that in together and the whole project. So in 2019, early 2019, leading into looking forward into October. So from early planning for October, we then brought in a new team internally within AFEX to then say how can
So the old team was external, you had outsourced.
So the first was we had outsourced to a company to build.
Okay.
The second is we tried to build a remote team. Different consultants working together.
Okay.
And it didn't work because of scope creeps and also not having enough responsibility issues. So we then brought in, I think two full-time developers and one external. So one mobile developer, one back-end developer, web back-end developer. Then we had an external consultant that also worked with them on the back-end and server management. So we then built the first, what we call WorkBench 2.0, and that was a CRM, a part ERP, and then also could connect the mobile data, the field data with the back-end administrative, where you could pull the reports, look at a few of the dashboards. So that was the first scope of WorkBench.
And this was for internal use or external?
Still internal use.
Okay.
So WorkBench was up until 2021 continued to be an internal work tool. Okay. And it solved the problem. Transaction was a lot more efficient. Errors were reduced very drastically. But then we kept adding additional features that we had not planned for at the database outset. So it then had issues around quality of data, downtime, because we're building. It was like we had a tricycle that we're using now to carry.
That hadn't been designed to scale.
It wasn't designed to scale, so we had scaling problems. And I remember when we decided to, and that sort of brought in the design of WorkBench 3.0. So WorkBench 3.0, I recall when we were starting to design that, there was a bit more process involved. We now at that point had a front-end person that could design, but the question was in my head and in the notes that I was writing, I had the different diagrams and the different dashboards and different tools. So I recall we'll be out, I was up at night or early in the morning, I would draw it up. Then we'd have a Skype call in the morning and I would describe what this and how it will link, and then it will draw, eventually build out the full, what today we'll call the Figma layout, but then it was just a PDF document. And that was what we then used to then convey the message to the developer. So we had something pictorial.
So you keep saying we, this was you and
this was me, the CEO, Akinka, the Chief Operating Officer.
Okay.
We were the product guys.
Exactly. I was just going to say that.
We had the front end guy that was it was then translating it into the idea and the prototype.
Okay.
And then we then engage the developers around that prototype.
Okay.
So it was a bit more interactive. We still weren't like consulting user, getting user engagement. We also weren't using an agile like scope, build small, deliver. It was like build it and design everything out and try to build it all out. But at least we figured out what the database structure was, what things would be. And that was now getting us 2019 season. So it was supposed to release October 2019. We couldn't get this out until May, so long overlap. And for
October because of your season?
October because our season and our revenue starts counting from October. The farmers harvest and we need to start using it. So we had to continue to use the old system that was already having scaling issues through till like April. So it was, April 31st was a critical date. I told everybody like 45 days out that on the 31st of April, I was shutting down the server of WorkBench 2.0. regardless of where we were on WorkBench 3.0. And everybody was like, they will not do this. But I was clear in my mind that if we did not stop that old system,
Yeah.
they would not complete the new system.
Yeah, because there was something to fall
There was
back
something
on.
to fall back on. So I did it. 1st of May, that was end of April.
Yeah.
1st of May 2000, we had no system. I recall that was in the lockdown
Oh wow.
with COVID, and there was no system to use, and it was crazy. And I said, look, guys, do your data from the work, store the transaction. If it takes us working 20 hours a day after the system is up, for us to then put all the data in the system, we're going to do this, but we're not going to put it on the old system. It was difficult. We had to live with some of those, some of the problems and the errors that we had for another year after that. But it was probably the best move, because we then got into a system that was a lot more scalable, could solve for the business. And at the point, it took us about 4 to 6 weeks before we then have WorkBench 3.0 finally deployed. And then we had a system that was working.
Okay, so you have a product called ComX. What is ComX? What does ComX do? Where did it start from? Did it originate from WorkBench? I know that ComX is, customer facing. So what's the relationship between WorkBench and ComX?
So, when you think about our world, the farmer first needs to produce. When it produces, it brings the product into our warehouse, we store it. So when we store it, then, we pay the farmer out. That's one first half of the transaction. Now, the second half of that transaction is that product then needs to be sold. Now, we have the marketplace where you then have buyers and sellers that then participate. So when you want to sell, you have to have a buyer. Typically, in the old world, a buyer will give you an LPO, and then you then deliver against that LPO. But we wanted, as an exchange, what you bring in is that real-time ability of people to negotiate on the trading market, and you match the transactions, and that fosters activity. So we wanted to build that out. We also knew that commodities itself was an investable asset, and an individual investor that wanted to invest, or an institutional investor that wanted to invest, needed a platform to be able to do it, since they weren't going to go, issue an LP or go, or even the complexity of managing many customers could not. You had to do it through a platform.
They probably don't even have access to that process anyway.
Exactly. So, it was then. So sometimes in 2018, we had started drawing out the vision of that platform. I remember I did a few training. I went to a creative leadership program in 2019, and my project was ComX, the design of ComX. The first, idea of ComX in how it was built was a cardboard, and I drew out the process flow and how, you could buy commodities, and you could sell it, and how you could actually tie it into a reward system, and where you could, pick a farmer that you wanted to apply your reward. That's a feature that I'm so very passionate about on ComX that we've not been able to implement till today. Just telling you how far out it takes to build a product.
Yeah.
So we literally had, it was one of those creative things where you had markers, crayons
so
and colors. So it was a flow on a cardboard with several sticky notes. And then I came back from Amsterdam to Abuja and told the team that we needed to produce a platform that was called, we had no name at the time, and that we're going to build a trading platform, and then we're going to go live in 2020 January. So
that means you are building ComX along with WorkBench.
Yes, so it was in parallel. At that time, I think our tech team had gone to maybe about 7 or 8 people.
Oh, I see.
In the rush towards trying to then fix and make WorkBench, we had to build a team and add a few more people. So there was that design part, there was that overlap. We also had the graphic. We had the graphic designer, the user interface, user experience designer at the time as well. So we could be a bit more playful and creative about what we wanted to deliver, and that was the first phase of the work.
Okay.
So it was then, how then do we make this work? What will it look like? Where will we deliver it from? what timeline, and I was always the crazy one when it came to timeline. Everything was possible in my own world, so everybody would be like, and I'll be like, we can do this. Isn't it just to have something that can match buy and sell and match a trade?
Yeah.
And then
isn't it just to write 10 lines of code
and then have something work? So it's just 10 screens. 10 screens on the Figma design.
Interesting.
So we set on the journey to build ComX. The first version of ComX was mobile alone, right? So you add the trade. Once the trade happened, it went to a back-end server that wasn't really visible, that just supported the mobile version to execute the trade. So everything was just one lump sum, very limited functionality.
And who was the user at this time?
The user that was the first customer-facing product that we built. And I remember the first meeting user, like how would they call it now? The product design meeting after some of my classes in Amsterdam, and I had the second or third photo.
I had learned how to prototype and create wireframes.
So what I did was so I had the user flow, the different pages and the transitions, and then I went to different investment and trading apps, and I did a screen grab of the one that
looked like what you were trying to explain.
Do. And I'll screen grab it and I'll paste it on the OneNote page, and then we all add together. We spent
actually.
That was all we had.
A lot of product owners and designers still do that till today.
Yeah, sometimes I tell my team, don't overthink it. Just look for what looks like it.
Yeah.
And let's, have that playful one. Once we get the flow and we are all on the same page with the idea, it's easy to then get into the perfection mode. So that was the first phase, and then we got into understanding the flow. Then we went into a number of investment apps at the time, which were growing. We had a number of the crypto apps start to emerge at the time, not as common today. Went through even some of the more standard trading platforms, and then tried to look at who was our user, because this was a customer facing, and what kind of streamlined process it will be able to go through. And now the first mistake we made here was that, I don't think I probably won't say it was best practice.
That's learn from best practice.
Correct. It was mostly what looked nice more than what worked best.
So you were more focused on the UI rather than the UX. Interesting.
So the first mistake we did was we built the same user flow for web and mobile.
Oh.
So we had, a very functional web
but very
clumsy mobile delivery. And that was ComX 1.0.
Okay.
But it did the job of you could sign up remotely. And for the first time, we could have a customer that we didn't know.
Okay.
Remember, as a business, every time we had traded either with a farmer or with a processor, there was a direct sale. So now we had sign up. We had to hit our first 5,000 numbers, and then it was just an email and a phone number.
Wow.
We did not have any customer relationship support based as a business. We had not really thought about how we had a social media messaging. Our language as the business, as AFEX, was very professional, very data driven, very
corporate, very big co.
Exactly. It just looks like very graphy, but from the commodities exchange and the financial market side. And then we had an audience that wasn't going to deal with data.
So this was now the journey from B2B to B2C.
To B2C. And it was and at some point, I remember just saying, okay, you know what, guys, this is not going to work. You're not going to put me in trouble with my regulators on AFEX. Go create your ComX social media pages, take your brand color, go yellow, purple, whatever you want to do, and create a voice for ComX that talks and speaks and engages with the user. Because the user was very clearly to what we are the business. And I think that acknowledgement was very defining for ComX and it having its life, but it's then growing from a very, very small idea into something today that drives the entire business operations of AFEX.
Oh, wow.
So all our trades today, all our financing, total of about 150 billion naira today, in this year to date, has been transacted all on ComX. And the beauty of our design today is to, which is also our design philosophy at AFEX, is to respect every user, understand that we're a multi-user type platform, and make sure that every user sees what they need. So if you sign up on ComX as a investor, you see what looks like you as an investor.
So you have different instances for different types of users.
If you sign as a trader from Saminaka in Kaduna State, you see an interface that looks like what you need to do.
Okay.
If you are a capital market investor, more institutional, and you sign up, you probably will go to the web, but you have something that works better for you. But that is just after 2-3 iterations. So we're on ComX 3.0 today, but it was a journey.
Interesting. It's quite impressive to see how you've been able to grow from just deciding, okay, this is what we're going to build based on assumptions of what the user needed, to actually getting to a point where you actually take the user into consideration before developing or building anything at all to start with.
Yeah, that's the beauty of entrepreneurship.
I agree.
I recall, we even the launch of ComX, right? So we built this app where, we brought all of us together a week before the launch date. We'd announced the launch date. We're fighting with the regulator on an approval. I mean, we're going back and forth on the approval. We didn't have the approval for the platform.
But we were planning to launch.
We had a date announced.
Oh, wow.
We had an event announced. In fact, the DJ regulator, so I made sure we got the DJ's buy that she was going to attend the event. And I knew clearly that, okay, we're going to get it to that point of, you've not approved my approval, and then you're going to come and launch this thing. But I think, we're very lucky we had a regulator that was very focused on market development, wanted to support, give us that sandbox to be able to play with, and understood that this is not something that had been created. We were venturing and allowed us to venture with caution. We were also very clear at the time that we're building a capital market entity, because this was around the time where crowdfunding and ad-tech funding was very popular. And there was a lot of temptation to go that route.
Yes.
But we're very clear that this was not what we were building. We're building a market. We had our eyes set at some of the big exchanges globally. And we're going to pivot and change the strategy for the short-term win based on what we saw. So
the vision was clear.
The vision was clear. The vision was clear. The path wasn't.
Naturally, so entrepreneurship is incremental anyway.
It's incremental and it's not linear.
Exactly.
That was the beauty for us. So I remember I saw a call, and it was the Executive Commissioner Operations for the Security and Exchange Commission.
Okay.
And I called and we started speaking, and they was like, let's talk about this. I have the paper, the approval request, and he was like, so tell me about what you're thinking. Tell me where you're coming from. Because the principle of exchanges is that you build a trading platform. You're primarily a middleware.
Yeah.
Then you have a stockbroking firm that comes in and builds the front end.
Oh, I see.
Which is the customer facing.
Typically, you shouldn't be both.
It is typically a B2B2C model.
Yes.
Right? But we knew no broker was going to come and invest, 200,000 to building an app or make a modification into their software for a market that didn't have as much turnover activity. And it's that point of how do you start a marketplace? How do you get both the demand and the supply side? When for the supply side, the interest is the catch-22 classical situation. So, that was why we were like, look, we're building the back end, which we know is the exchange, but then we needed to build that front end from day one. But in the principle of building that front end, we built it in a way that we build on the business model of the broker into that platform.
Okay.
So it was a joint, almost like it was an order management system for the broker. They could come in, create their community, and then they could set up and bring in their investor and still play their brokerage role within ComX.
Oh, interesting.
Only that, they didn't have to go and invest
to build their
own app. So once we were able to clarify that we're still separating that role and that feature existed, they saw wisdom in it, and then they gave us the approval that night. And then here we are launching the platform. But sometimes those are some of the things that go behind the scenes, and some of the faith that you have to hold as an entrepreneur on today. So we had the launch, and then it was like, what's that going to look like? How do we grow from 100 user, which was primarily AFEX staff, friends, families, called all my in-laws and everybody, our emailing list, and helped, and then into the first 5,000. I remember when we celebrated the first 5,000, when we started growing.
How long did it take to get to 5,000? Okay.
It took 6 months.
This was with active digital marketing.
So it was very heavy digital marketing.
Okay.
And then there were so many problems. I mentioned that we were not a B2C culture from customer support. I recall we would get some emails about somebody signed off the process, and you got an email saying, this is your OTP. Then the person will respond back to the email saying, what does OTP mean?
Oh, wow.
And then people will fund their wallet on a Sunday morning, which, and then funding the wallet meant they transfer to AFEX bank account.
Yeah.
And that was one transaction of the many gazillion transactions we did as a business. And, the guys paying,
at this time, you didn't have a real-time process for
there's no real-time process. So we had integration with the cards, but we also had the option to just pay into the bank accounts for people that didn't want to connect.
Okay.
So they will pay into our bank account through a bank transfer, and then
there was a manual process that was required.
So during the week, we had a process for it. So somebody will fund, 500 naira on a Sunday afternoon when everybody was having a good time and resting. And then we send an email, and then everybody will be calling everybody, let's fund the wallet, let's fund the wallet, let's fund the wallet. It was so interesting, managing that, and also then saying, how then do you start to go from, what was a very manual process into today fully virtual accounts where, it's
have
almost
real-time
instant
processing.
settlements.
Yeah.
I think the other part of it was to then explain to the market how the product. So first, also remember that I said we built the web version on a mobile, so it was canned. So people had the problem of understanding how to navigate the app. Then the second was understanding how to then trade, when to buy maize, when to buy commodity, cocoa, the difference between them, what it meant, when they made money, when making money was enough, and when to exit. So, and how do we then start to create the content and deliver the content and manage that? So that was sort of something we had to learn and grow and evolve.
Yes.
There wasn't one silver bullet solution. But we've improved tremendously where we are today. But it's still a new market, one that is not easy because it's around fundamentals. You have to understand the fundamentals. In the same way, sometimes you buy a tube of yam for 400, sometimes you buy it for 1,000, and then after a few months it comes back to 600. So that same nature drives agricultural assets, and then being able to understand, when it rains, when it's raining. And so we're making that process seamless today, but it was a challenge 2 years ago.
Okay. So with the launch and adoption of ComX, what would you say was the going out the door? What was the number one problem that you guys had? Was it getting the customers in? Was it getting them comfortable with the platforms? Was it support? Was it finance? Was it partners?
So support was an internal challenge we had to reorientate for. But I think the biggest problem had been getting the customer comfortable. So, again, I said ComX 1.0 because there was ComX 2.0, and then today there's ComX 3.0. ComX 2.0 then, brought back the old, said, minimalism. It brought in the concept of minimalism, said anything that is not 3 steps away is a waste. How can you make the whole user journey 3 steps?
Awesome.
How can you take out everything that is not a must-have? How do people navigate? Which pages do they use the most, and how can we focus on building content around those pages? And then create a different user journey for mobile. Essentially optimize. A very difficult decision we had to go through was that today there's no web mobile version of ComX. So when
Right.
we couldn't solve for that user experience with the mobile, so we had to have the mobile primarily a desktop
Okay.
solution because
As
it
well
then
as the
worked.
web.
The web, so we had the web version for a desktop. So you go on the laptop and then you can access the web. But when you're on the mobile
You
or
have
a
a mobile
tab,
app.
you should use the mobile app
Okay.
because when you try to use the web experience, it's still, even though when you try to, because of the graphs and the peculiarity of
So you couldn't get the responsiveness right.
Correct.
Okay.
So, and that's a trade-off that we still maybe need to get to, or maybe the market is evolving.
Well, prioritization is one of the most important things in product management anyway. So obviously,
you have to know your customer, know what they want, and build for them.
To them.
And naturally, when people are storing value and investing, there's that possession and that connection they want. So they typically want a native app that can give them notifications, they can engage with. It's almost like my money is on my phone. There's that sense of belonging the customer has.
You mentioned the marketplace earlier, and we talked about the difference of getting which comes first, the chicken or the egg. So how were you able to navigate that? What did you guys do?
So the hardest part was fixing the value chain from the farmer to market. So that was difficult. Nobody wanted to go in the middle of Zamfara and go and run a warehouse or go and aggregate and transport 1,000 kilometers to get to Lagos or to Abuja. So it was clear that if we could solve that side, there was a value proposition for the buy side that people paid for. But it was very expensive, so we're lucky we had the right founding investors. They were patient enough, not as patient as we would want, but patient enough to help us through that journey. And that helped us focus on building that infrastructure and building that very solidly. It was very expensive, but we did that. And when we got that, that was a value proposition for the buy side. And when we got the buy side and you could match demand and supply, it then made sense to come in. But this is a journey of, up until 2020, we will not even have a conversation with capital market operators. For the first 5-6 years, in fact, people felt like we're making too much money that weren't interested in getting them to participate. But it was like, look, we sell trust, and everybody, you only have one chance at trust. If you don't build a system that you are 110% sure of to consistently deliver on that promise, you don't want to go to the market. You don't want to test that trust and then come back. So we delayed that entry into the capital market until 2020, where we had very strong processes. We had scalable technology. We had the infrastructure that made sense, but we also then had started to build a strong brand. So we came in strong, and it's been growth since then.
So you used your B2C to find your product market fit to a large extent. So in getting customers for ComX, for example, the first focus was to get farmers to buy in, so to speak, so that you have
so to create a product on ComX, we first had to create a product for farmers. And so farmers came in, they transacted through WorkBench, we sold through WorkBench,
which was the B2C aspect of the business.
We then plugged in WorkBench into ComX. So what comes on WorkBench then gets to shown on ComX, and then it's now tradable now, and that then allows if you think about it, so in 2020 January, we launched into the market with the ComX for retail investors. I think somewhere mid to October 2020, we then also introduced that for institutional investors when we had done 2.0 with the web version, and that's been a journey since then. And only in October 2021 season did we then introduce it to the physical trading for the processors to also come in and buy through ComX. So it's almost like one user, 1 year, one user type, one same platform, but one user type, 1 year of building
because and support. Because the flow is completely different for everybody. The use case is different.
Correct.
Okay. So getting customers or getting that, what's the adoption rate on ComX right now?
So adoption. Today we have 100,000 users, primarily investors, cash-based investors on ComX.
Okay.
On the retail side, on WorkBench, we have 400,000 farmers connected, into that platform. We do have quite a number of processing companies, food and beverage sector, animal care, livestock, and then the fund asset managers, securities trading companies also connect. Capital market players also connected on ComX. So you have very active participation from different spheres of the market through that same platform, creating price discovery.
Okay, so your B2C is still very active.
Yes, B2C is very active.
Rather B2B.
Yes, so B2B pays the bills, B2C drives growth, and that's where the future is.
You are running and building in an environment where you are practically pioneers in every market that you go to. And you are also building for users and customers who require a lot of education. What's your take on developing a new market by having to educate your customers or users or your target customers?
It's a difficult task because first you have to get the right messaging. Second, it's difficult changing user behavior. So when you're engaging the market, the most difficult thing when you're introducing a product to the market is changing user behavior.
Yeah.
You always want to be in a situation where you're educating the market on your value propositions and your unique selling propositions, and not necessarily trying to change their behavior. But sometimes, you find yourself having to do both.
Yeah.
Or you have your core user group, and then right outside that user group, you have to then change behaviors for that adoption.
There's a common saying that sometimes users don't know what they want until you tell them.
Correct.
So.
Correct. And that's the it's a patient process, because also when you try to sell rather than educate, then you sometimes turn off a customer, and then it's harder to bring them back on.
Yeah.
And that was one of the, we did make that learning. So our messaging initially was download, invest. And today our messaging on ComX is, we love you. This is good. It's good for the planet. It's good for the people. It's good for you. And then it's futuristic. And I think we've gotten a lot more endeared investor. And that's the heart and that's the joy of ComX. And particularly a retail participation of the markets. So it's harder when you don't have other revenue streams. We're lucky that we have the B2B side to pay the bills. But when this is all you do, then that iteration and that being able to find that product market fit is important. What I always say is that, typical entrepreneurs have 10 ideas every morning. You have to be able to find your revenue moat, build that and preserve that. Then when you have that, then look at your scaling engine. So you have to separate what is revenue and what pays salary, and then what drives scale and what drives loyalty. When you have these three and you can sequence it together, then you have that growth engine.
Okay. So that's from the ComX perspective, from investors' perspective. But the B2B also must have had a major hurdle to getting farmers on board. So what was the process for this?
It was a very strong value proposition. Nobody finances farmers in this part of the world. What we found out is that when you go into a community, when we open up first warehouse, people will come in and test. The early adopters will come in and put in 2-3 bags and sell it. And then if they get paid, the same day or the following morning, they'll come back, in a week with 2 or 3 people when they're going to the market and come back and repeat that transaction. We also saw that nobody will come and store. One of the value provision we have is storage.
Yeah.
You can bring in 3 bags of maize, store it for a fee monthly, and 2 months time you can come back and pick it or you can then trade it there. So nobody will store in the first year. You'll start seeing storage on the second to the third year. When they even store, they'll come back after a month or two
to check on it
and be sure it's there. So one of the things, and then it was, at the very beginning when AFEX was still new, it was like, who are you? The only people that come to talk about things like what we did commercially were donors. But the donors naturally didn't have the incentive to follow through all the time. So it sounded like, yeah, I could remember a number of our outreach meetings where we go to the local communities to engage and explain AFEX. And then they were like, after we had the whole pitch, they were like, one of the farmers came up.
Obviously, in their local languages.
In their local language, it was like, Kana de Wasani, like, these are jokers, literally meaning. And then we came back. I'd mentioned when we did the Grain for Fertilizer program and we were matching in May 2015 when we had that product market fit. So when we came back and were able to then solve this problem. So in 2014, they called us Kana de Wasani. So when we came and then we started the Grain for Fertilizer program and we were swapping. So for instance, the way we sold that product was, this was a trade for barter. For 10 bags of maize, you got 11 bags of fertilizer. It sold like wildfire. It was just as simple as that. But it was a complicated product on the back end. It was a forward contract and a swap and this. So, then the same farmer groups came back and then they were transacting. And then when they did their transaction and they got their fertilizer, they were so excited. Then they were like, AFEX, Bawasa. And that's how, our slogan came till today. AFEX, Bawasa, like, these guys are no jokers. But, that engagement, that trust is still a cardinal part of our business today.
Again, pioneer issues. What was data like when you started? Access to data, availability of data. What was it like?
It's very difficult to find a lot of data around most sectors. Things are getting better, but then even as a startup, when you think about it, most of the data sources that are reliable are also paid for. And then I usually, hardly really find a startup that will pay $300 for data subscription just to get our data to build a deck. You understand, monthly, and that's always a challenge. There's several ways, and there's several books that say how you can charge about this. My gut feeling, which is by no means an instruction or the right, the only way to do it is to have a conviction and have an engagement on your market. Once you know your customer and you can find that product market fit. I'm a product market fit guy. If you can find a product market fit and you can gauge a number of your user base for your first iteration, I believe that you will be able to then start to scale and find iterations of that product that can then expand your market niche. My philosophy is find one customer that you solve, 8 or 9 out of 10 of their problem. Make sure you can find the first 1,000 customers around that, and then start to build from there. Because sometimes we get so obsessed about getting the right data, but the question is, how much will we ever get to? When I think of when we started, when I was on the investment side on AFEX as a transaction, we had said in 10 years we're going to get 10% market share of this and that and that.
How do you define that?
That's the problem. Like, how do you define that? When are you going to get there? Like, what's that market share? And then what's the value of precise data, right? At the end of the day, you still will not be able to. What's the quality of it, right? You still cannot tell whether it will rain or not rain tomorrow. So, why then get obsessed over that? So, but it doesn't take out the fact that as a founder, as an entrepreneur, you must know what your market is. You must be able to articulate it. Sometimes what people do is to look for sometimes I would say we want to be the CBOT for Africa as HTM. We want to be the Chicago Board of Trade, which is a global market, but we want to be that for Africa. So sometimes it could be the Uber for commodities or for agriculture or for tractors, which is one of my famous brands in agriculture. So you have to find something that then makes sense and you use that to anchor your pitch. But sometimes it's just as simple as we sell fertilizer to farmers and then we buy commodities from them.
Interestingly, there's a lot of hype about the size of the African market. And do you agree that, Africa is that huge a market in terms of, not in terms of size, like not in terms of, you know, the basic size now, in terms of the actual addressable size of the market? And what would you say from your experience is the quality of this market?
And you know, with the benefit of hindsight and the luxury of having, you know, founded and folded up a couple businesses, I'm a bottom up guy, you know, and even when I am privileged to be on the other side of the pitch deck from an investor standpoint, I still want to understand your connection with your markets,
Yeah.
versus your view understanding of the global picture. You must have a vision and you must be able to articulate your vision. And most of the time, that comes from the passion that is driving that vision more than the vision in itself. But for me, I believe more on, because, you know, think about it. You know, Africa is not one market. Africa is 54 countries. Nigeria is not one market.
Each of them have their peculiarities, different regulations, culture, everything is different.
It's so different. And in the life of a founder, you know, for us as AFEX, it's taking us 10 years, and then today we're thinking Pan Africa. But then when we think Pan Africa, we're thinking another 10 years ahead, right? To build a Pan African business. So we'll probably be truly Pan Africa in after 20 years of operations. And when I even say truly Pan African, I'm saying 10 countries out of 54. So, you know, I do think that it's a bit overrated. I think you must know who you want to sell to. You must be able to scope that market out. Sometimes it's your city, and that's your market, right? And that's going to be a market for the first 2-3 years.
So start from where you are.
Start from there, but be crisply articulate about who that is. And then you go from there.
This is a majorly regulated sector, so obviously, you know, you would have had to deal with regulations, our regulatory bodies across all the different sectors, the different industries you're playing in. So, how has the navigation been?
I think you know, for both, when I think of both from the agriculture sector as well as the capital market sector, you know, I was very young when in the early days of AFEX, and one thing about Nigeria is that in a lot of the rooms were a lot older people, and where you can come in and play to that strength of your youthfulness and, you know, young and ambitious, a lot of times you get that, you know, almost sympathy, like, you know, it's my son kind of thing. So I leverage a lot of that, it's my son kind of vibes in navigating a lot of the complex, you know, the complex regulatory issues. I think also because at the core of a commodities exchange, you are solving a very fundamental problem, and a lot of them could connect very closely with. They were one step from the farms for most of them. Their parents were farmers, their cousins are still farmers, and they could connect to that solution you're trying to bring. So I think that also helped. You know, we were very likable from the beginning by regulators.
You are up to date in all the required licenses.
Yeah, all the fundamentals particularly, but you know, these things, regulation evolves. So in every day, and then the business also is not static.
What is next for AFEX? What's on your horizon?
Well, you know, where I am now, it's been 10 years on the journey with AFEX. Now, you know, I spend a lot of time worrying, you know, thinking about the next 10 years. We're sort of articulating a new strategy that will define and guide us through that journey. And that's a process typically takes about a year for us. But, you know, we're clear, you know, the next 10 years we'll have 10 commodities, we'll operate in 10 countries in Africa. And, you know, we will, you know, that's the move. We'll sell, you know, foster intra-Africa trade, but would also be a strong block to trade with the rest of the continent.
Okay. Thank you very much, Deji. This has been very insightful and very interesting. I appreciate the honesty in your answers and the full-fledged responses. I believe that this would be a very helpful session for young founders, young and even old ones.